BBC in the UK released a documentary titled Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone, which shows the suffering, the plight of the Palestinians through the lens of some teenagers in Gaza who, tell their story. Uh, I haven't seen it. It's been taken down. I wasn't too thrilled to see it anyway, but we can't see it at the moment because turns out that the main character, I'm going to call it a character, in that movie was the son of a Hamas official, senior Hamas official in Gaza. It turns out that others are also Hamas related. David Collier did some great work on this. Maybe we'll talk on a different episode about the details of what he did. Today, I want to really focus on how it's being handled by the people who did this, and not the people who created the documentary, but the people who chose to air it, and generally the pro-Palestinian propaganda organizations that they don't like getting caught in things like this. We're going to read through an article in the BBC from yesterday about their own decision to remove this documentary. Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Razi Ginsburg. I'm joined by James Valiant. James, your initial thoughts before we go into this article.
I guess for my first impression is I'm glad that they decided not to go with the documentary. At least Western media won't be polluted with what I suspect would have been a badly biased presentation.
Well, they decided to go with the documentary. Then an actual journalist, David Collier, looked
Hate it.
into it, and
Yeah.
oopsie, turns out now we don't know when it comes to the BBC what they actually knew before. We just have their word to go on, and we know what that's worth. Let's look at this article. So the article is titled "BBC Pulls Gaza Film as It Carries Out Checks Over Hamas Links." The BBC has removed the documentary about Gaza from its iPlayer streaming service while it carries out, quote, further due diligence after discovering its 13-year-old narrator was the son of a Hamas official. Now, I'm no lawyer. I'm going to pause here, but James, you are. If you
Well, if
were,
anyone can see, I'm a lawyer.
if you were a legal advisor to the BBC, would you recommend carrying out due diligence before the documentary is aired or after? I mean, I don't know how these things work.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a legal problem because it would only be a legal problem if I could say that it was, some kind of defamation or something like, or a violation of the new censorship laws that unfortunately the United Kingdom has. But I think anyone who'd been through journalism school knows that the basic minimum requirements are that you fact check, make sure you expose the biases of your sources, you have, confirmation and corroboration of everything that your witnesses say. It's not merely what lawyers are always looking for, responsibly looking for corroboration, and it's part of their responsibility to do so. But that also applies to journalism. Whether you've been to law school or journalism school, is a basic requirement of professionalism and a respect for the truth that you corroborate, that you check the backgrounds of your witnesses, make sure they have, the correct evidentiary foundation, and that there may not be a major reason for them, as in this case, to just simply be lying and spouting propaganda.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan Honig, for the super chat. Let's continue with the article. It amazes me even how they report about their own failures. So the article continues. The broadcaster has been criticized for Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone, which centered on the son of Hamas's deputy minister of agriculture. The BBC said it had not been informed of the family connection in advance by the film's production company. Okay, I mean, to me, this is you should read that sentence and take it with you to anything the BBC says absolutely about this war, but maybe generally if you follow their news. They hadn't been informed by terrorists that this is terrorists. And remember, we keep hearing that Israel isn't letting journalists into Gaza, which of course they're not letting, people from Britain go into a war zone and so on. But uh, we keep seeing when we keep hearing that more journalists have died than anywhere else. Those journalists are essentially the kind of people who produced this documentary. Of course, a 13-year-old kid, certainly in a culture like in Gaza, does what he's told, and this is adult produced, and the adults did this all the way through. This is Hamas, and yeah,
So
again,
it wasn't
all journalism that comes from Gaza should be questioned over this. Of course, it won't be, James.
so this wasn't produced by a British journalist, but produced by independent documentarians. I'm not quite sure what that implies. But in any event, yeah, before you even announce you're going to broadcast such a thing, especially if you didn't produce it, especially if it's coming from some source that you're not sure of, you have to do this double and triple checking. I'm surprised they even announced they would go with it initially under those circumstances. And a 13-year-old son of a Hamas leader, yeah, that's their star witness here. Wow.
So months ago, I don't think you were on the shows that we did about this. There were a couple, but there was this story about the IDF killing a man who was, I believe, autistic and mentally challenged, and had issues. And that was a story that we covered, autism and Down syndrome. Thanks, Daniel. And that was something we covered immediately after the story came out. Just from reading it, thinking, wow, this is very, very bad journalism throughout. First of all, it is what mostly those who want us to all be pro-Hamas do when they cover the Middle East, which is these personal interest stories of the people you can't possibly not feel bad for, like children or people who have no capacity to actually fight against what's being done in their name or escape. And then but there were all sorts of issues. Like the whole story came from the family, and so we covered it for the first time as soon as I saw the story. We just went through it and questioned, as we often do on usually on the reality show. We go through a story and we question the details and the way and the method. Then also David Collier, somebody who I really hope we can get on the show at some point, is he looked through it and it turned out this was Hamas. This was a Hamas family. The mother was the widow of a Hamas terrorist. The children who didn't have autism and Down syndrome were Hamas, and I think one of them was Islamic Jihad. And this is where the BBC got its story then. That was, again, also the BBC. So this is very consistent with what the BBC does. And we'll see that when we continue the story. But James, any thoughts? You remember
Yeah.
the story of the kid with
Yeah,
Down
I
syndrome?
do vaguely remember it. And that is simply bad, objectively bad journalism, unprofessional journalism. When you have a single biased source or set of sources like a family, that's especially when you need to have independent corroboration, some evidence that comes from some other source other than this family that obviously has a certain bias. But there's a wider point, and this is the important point. Even if such a developmentally disabled person was killed or injured, it's the fault of Hamas. Hamas wants headlines, as we've said many, 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 many times. Hamas wants headlines like this. Yes, our children are being killed. Yes, look at even handicapped people, disabled people are being killed by these vicious IDF attacks. Well, that's Hamas's fault. Hamas brought the attacks, these reasonable actions in self-defense upon themselves. It's Hamas's doing. And of course, that's the very headline that they're seeking as a matter of tactics and strategy here, is to get, play on Western altruistic heartstrings, which is just that, out of context altruism, getting you to blame the defenders for what is perfectly reasonable self-defense when it's the attackers who brought it on their own innocence, insofar as there are innocents within Gaza.
Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. I just read this. troll comment. Okay, I'll skip it. But there is a different comment here that I wanted to read by Baconator, who says the filming of this propaganda movie was done by Hamas, as there are no BBC journalists in Gaza. Have you seen how many cameras they have in that hellhole? Yeah, they have no shortage of cameras. They're as deprived of cameras as they are of food. And we see this, by the way, we saw this with when the first hostages were released in this current deal, and where Hamas actually had to make sure that the savages, as in the Palestinian people, don't lynch those girls, and the deal can continue as long as Hamas wants it to. And but we also saw that they all had cameras and were all filming the whole thing. So
I'm sure
yeah.
provided by Al Jazeera or perhaps the Islamic Republic of Iran have no shortage of suppliers for those kind of things, do they?
Could be. I mean, we've covered the violence, settler violence in the West Bank, which may or may not be a thing. I assume it is to some extent a thing, but it's the way it's shown to us here outside Israel and in Israel is through cameras that Palestinians get from B'Tselem, which is a so-called human rights organization in Israel fighting for the terrorists. So they had their big project in about a decade ago was giving cameras to Palestinians so they can show that they're being attacked. You never see in any of that footage any Palestinian attacking. Now, it just so happens that Palestinians often commit terrorist attacks. B'Tselem doesn't care about it. And again, we undoubtedly have a Gaza equivalent, even if it's not as formal. By the way, I hate it when people say, "Who funds you?" as if that means you don't actually believe in what you do. I believe B'Tselem that they are as evil as they tell us they are, but they are funded by European governments in large part, and we should
Right.
remember that, and our viewers should remember that when they.
Produced by Hamas, I think, is then the best way of looking at it, as the questioner says, and complete with, when necessary, English subtitles, I'm sure, to make it plain to the English speaking audience what's going on here. Sheer propaganda.
Yeah, let's continue with the article. So the program had initially remained available to stream, but was removed from iPlayer on Friday morning, with the BBC saying it would investigate the matter. And now this is like a couple of days after this came out. So a statement said, quote, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone features important stories we think should be told, those of the experiences of children in Gaza. There have been continuing questions raised about the program, and in the light of these, we are conducting further due diligence with a production company. The program will not be available on iPlayer while this is taking place. So the BBC fully supports the idea of stories being told, from the perspective of children, knowing that there are no children who can tell a story fully from their perspective. It is the adults who will decide what story we end up hearing. The due diligence is done with the production company. Again, if this is if these are children of Hamas operatives, the production company is not independent of Hamas. This is not a possibility. Whatever it officially is, it is Hamas, officially or unofficially. And the BBC continues to work with them, even knowing all this.
I just have to comment, this is a shameful use of children. They ought to be ashamed of themselves for even considering broadcasting this. To use 13-year-olds with that background, and that's who we're relying on, and without the wider context, that is a shameless, awful use of children, in my view, to try and, again, play on Western altruistic heartstrings.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for another super chat. Yeah, use your delusion says due diligence can't happen after the fact. Terrible policy. Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes you do due diligence and it turns out that you missed something. But in the case of the BBC, this is not, the first accident they had in this war or in their coverage of Israel historically. This is very much on brand. This is the part of the BBC brand. The part that isn't the BBC brand is us discovering, David Collier coming in and fact checking and finding out that this is actually a Hamas produced uh, propaganda movie that the BBC is temporarily removing from their streaming service. That is not on brand. They like to get away with it and to justify it. And again, they're justifying it in this statement. But yeah, this is what you should expect from the BBC.
Right. Unfortunately so. I mean, for more than a year now, the despicable headlines that you'll get on stories from the BBC or the New York Times or in the main media outlets in English in the English speaking press have been really disgusting, as we've noted many times.
Deborah asks, will BBC do a show on the experience of the Bebas babies in Gaza? I I wouldn't rule it out. That's the thing. They're officially and they're a government organization and they're funded by taxes. Even if it's not taxes, it's a license which you can somehow opt out of. It is the use of force that is funding them, and they have a charter, and part of what they have to do is be impartial. Now they're not impartial, and nobody does anything or says anything, but from time to time, like I saw a Guardian article that was favorable to one of the hostages or sympathetic to what he went through. So, and the Guardian doesn't have to be impartial legally. So, I wouldn't I wouldn't rule it out, but again, their coverage is across the board pro-Palestinian, and they might throw out something like this to then say, well, but here's something we did about the Bibas family. So yeah, it's if it fits within their propaganda, just like Hamas, we talk about Hamas, sometimes honoring parts of deals that like or making deals and then honoring parts of it, and sometimes they say that they're going to do something and they do it, but it's not because they believe honesty is important. It's because they believe murdering Jews is important. And towards that goal, sometimes they'll need to tell the truth, sometimes they'll need to lie. And again, their British propaganda arm, or one part of that arm, the BBC, is essentially the same.
You'd think that having to catch them in lie after lie after lie, as we have done and as we've noted for more than a year now, that many of the things that Hamas reports are just outright lies, turn out to be flat, factually false. But we shouldn't have to wait for proof to that. And all it takes is one good lie, and you should just dismiss the source. But these are the perpetrators of October 7th. They should not be given any credibility in the first instance. I mean, using Hamas sources means like saying, let's talk to Goebbels and Hess about, the situation in Germany during the Third Reich. Our man on the scene interview with, Rudolf Hess about tell us how things are going in the glorious Wehrmacht. That's exactly what the equivalent is. And BBC ought to be ashamed for even considering it, because it's the equivalent of relying on Hitler's propaganda or SS people as sources.
Well, it would have been Rudolf Hess Jr., who was a complete innocent civilian suffering from the bombing by the RAF. So that's
Who turns out to be a son of one of the major leaders of the Third Reich.
so I'm going to skip some of the article where they talk about people who raised concerns and oppose this, which we approve of and agree with, and go on to further explanation. So the article continues later. The BBC initially kept the program on iPlayer, but added a message at the start reading, quote, "The narrator of this film is 13-year-old Abdullah. His father has worked as a deputy agriculture minister for the Hamas-run government in Gaza. The production team had full editorial control of filming with Abdullah." That's that's quite the excuse when you're gonna say we're gonna keep doing this. This was done by again a 13-year-old in this country can't do stuff like that without parental approval. In a savage culture, you absolutely have to answer to your parents about everything at the age of 13.
I mean, it's incredible. Obviously, I assume that a 13-year-old, first of all, they're a 13-year-old. Second of all, that they're basically guided by someone else. They have to be. And then you tell me this is the son of a Hamas official. Okay, then my presumption has to be walking in the door that this is going to be whatever the 13-year-old was told by his Hamas dad to say.
The article continues. Hamas is prescribed as a terrorist organization by the UK, Israel, and others. A BBC statement on Wednesday said, quote, "The film remains a powerful child's eye view of the devastating consequences of the war in Gaza, which we believe is an invaluable testament to their experiences, and we must meet our commitment to transparency." So, yeah, yeah.
It's transparent. The one thing that I'll give them there, BBC's motives are quite transparent. Yeah, but like I say, it's rather than discussing who is to blame for whatever suffering they may even uncover, let's assume that they're uncovering the suffering by children in Gaza. Rather than step back to consider the broader context, it's just there is children suffering. As such, that's bad, no matter what. So, and Israel's fault, no matter what. Full stop. No further need for discussion. It's a giant exercise in context dropping. The critical context that's being dropped here. Whose fault any of the suffering that may be occurring in Gaza is, even if it is true that they're suffering in Gaza and they're going to depict it for us.
Yeah, in terms of this is obviously making headlines in the UK. I don't think it's a big enough deal because again, this is something that we've seen before. There was this study a few months ago that showed how like gave numbers as to how the BBC is biased in terms of how they report, and we covered that here as well. This is we heard Jeremy Bowen, the international news editor, whatever title he has, the person in charge of how the BBC reports this, saying sometimes the truth isn't in the middle, it's on one side, saying this in the context of why they report in favor of those who say that they want to exterminate the Jews. That was Jeremy Bowen's statement in that context. He is siding, he is telling you very clearly, when we report the news, we report it in a way that will lead you to our point of view. Our point of view is we support a side. That side, if you listen to that side, which the BBC doesn't really want you to listen to that side in their own words, they want you to listen to propaganda for that side through the filter for Western ears of the BBC. But if you actually listen to what the Palestinians say, they say very clearly they want to kill every last one of the Jews in Israel and take over the country. That is where the truth lies, according to the person who decides how the BBC reports. So this propaganda movie and the people who produced it, that is again perfectly on brand for the BBC.
Yeah, it's propaganda in the bad sense. I mean, there is an objective, neutral sense, I think, of the word propaganda, but this is propaganda in the absolutely biased, falsely filtered, non-objective sense of the term propaganda. Any connotation of that sort, it is bullshit, in other words, and they're shoving bullshit down your throat. And unless they were to start out by saying, okay, here's what Hamas has done historically, and take us through what Hamas did, including on October 7th, and then take us through all the lies that Hamas has told us about hospital being bombed, or about the Bibas children being killed in an IDF bombing. And no, what we needed before, to be objective, you'd have to say, well, our source obviously has repeatedly lied to everyone about many matters pertaining to this war. And so that would be the only kind of objective way of truly being fair here. A professional journalist would have to cover all aspects of the credibility of their source within the material. Otherwise, they're just lying to you. And they're telling you they're just lying to you. We're giving you a slanted, one-sided view, which could be filled with all kinds of lies and exaggerations. Footnote. So what value is it as journalism? What the hell is BBC doing. As you point out, this is, people in the United Kingdom pay for it through their television licensing fees. They're supposed to be non-biased. It's like National Public Radio in my country. They get government money and they're supposed to be non-biased. And of course, you turn on NPR and what do you get? One side political view of things. That's not journalism. That's not objective journalism in any sense. It's the selling of lies, and the lies of, mind you, the perpetrators of October 7th. Get that.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned and of course spoke about it at the time about how after October 17th, 2023, when a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket fell on the parking lot of El Ali Hospital, the immediate reports were that 500 people died in an Israeli bombing. This was reported by the BBC as well. Some people still have on their Twitter, Israel just bombed the hospital and 500 people killed,
Oh
like
yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn, who almost became prime minister of this country a few years ago. But the BBC and other media organizations after that kept repeating Hamas lies, but added, at least when it came to the death toll that they reported, added as reported by Hamas's Gaza, what is it? Gaza's
Health
Hamas-run
Ministry.
health ministry.
Yes, I think it was the
Yeah,
Gaza Health Ministry,
and
aka Hamas.
yeah,
Uh,
and Jeremy Bowen, when questioned about it, said something to the effect of, "Well, these are the only numbers we have. What do you expect us to do? Not report anything?" And
yeah,
you would
I
think,
do.
you would
When you
think
know them to
just
be lies, you don't report them,
yeah, you
or
would
you
think just
report
the
them as
question,
lies. In fact,
if
there were statistical analyses, and we've covered that, showing how those numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry could not be, were impossible, or highly
yeah.
improbable, depending on which statistician you covered it. They were lies, provable lies, and yet they continued to say so without any further asterisks. These are the only numbers I have. Well, if the only numbers you had on the uh, German casualties during World War II, again, were coming from Nazi officials, you'd say, obviously, this is Nazi propaganda, but this is what the Nazi propagandists are trying to get you to believe. That's how you'd introduce it.
Yeah, and that's how we should introduce everything the BBC says. This is how Nazi propagandists, this is what they want you to believe. Look, Jeremy Bowen saying, "What do you expect us to do? Not report anything? We only get numbers from terrorists, therefore that's what we're going to report." Should have been in a news organization that actually wants to tell you what's going on. This would have been the last thing he says in his job. He would have been fired immediately because that tells you not just specifically that he wants to keep reporting Hamas numbers, it tells you his approach that, if somebody tells you something and you can't verify it, well, you go with it. Because what are you going to do? Not report? I mean,
Yeah, well, that's not what a journalist or a decent historian does. They tell you their source. They corroborate it with other evidence. Otherwise, they're really not being a professional journalist or historian in any sense, are they? They're not telling you the facts. You can't even rely on the facts that they report as facts.
well, Spencer says, "Sorry, Alex, James is the new best dressed on ARCUK's network." Well,
No,
there's
no, Jonathan, he has it all over me. I'm sorry. I freely concede Jonathan is the sartorial splendor of this channel when we do get the opportunity to have him.
Yeah, Jonathan doesn't need a bigger head than he already has, but yeah, he does wear a three-piece suit. I don't think that's a three-piece. So
No.
yeah. But there's a reason for this. So on the channel, we have the Daily Objective every day. We have the reality show every weekday, 12 shows a week that you can watch for free as much as you want, and watch it repeatedly. There are some things we do that are not free, that are behind a paywall. One of those things, behind one of the higher paywalls we have, platinum and above, for members through the website, Inner Circle for YouTube members, is the mock trials. And James is dressed up because even though these trials are usually more mock than trial, they do feature an actual prosecutor, an actual criminal defense attorney, and then in this case, me and Jennifer Miguel, millennial Rand fan, who will be playing a Mexican immigrant to the US. I will be playing somebody who really should be working for the BBC. Playing somebody who a concerned citizen who doesn't want immigrants in the country. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. It is a good enough reason alone to become a member at the platinum or inner circle level. Of course, you get access to a bunch of other things. I think Michael Leibowitz and I did a mock debate a couple days ago. James, I think you and I will do one probably sometime this week as well, hopefully in preparation for my debate with Moshe Feiglin. So there are many, many. Oh yeah, Judge Daniel Kraus has presided over 6 cases. This is number 7. So make sure you become a member if you can afford to do so at that level, and get to join this. And in a couple of weeks, you will have 2 weeks to watch it if you can't watch it live. In a couple of weeks, we will have the jury session where we will decide whether or not to deport Jennifer. So thanks everybody for watching. The mock trial begins in 30 minutes. We will be back tomorrow with the daily objective. Thanks, James. We'll see you soon.